This one was a fairly uncommon individual. He was quite simply a simple shepherd of no great value to society, of no great value to anything and to anyone. But because of his particular abilities and talents in allowing us to express ourselves, the perception was created by others that a God was speaking. In so doing, this one's physical body was elevated to a status within society, a status of deity, which is why we chose ourselves to retreat. This one, at that particular point in time, believed his own press releases and began to perceive himself as a deity. And so doing, he made choices which, as a result of certain representations, were perceived as coming from us. The necessity was made for us to retreat, and we simply chose no longer to speak. However, this one continued for a period of time, pretending to speak for us. We came to him much later, and he chose to shift his consciousness and return to his simple perspectives of existence before casting off feet of clay. However, the moment in time and space, the representation was sufficient to shift a civilization forward. And that, dear friends, is how the god Ra came about. The symbology of the sun was that which we created. And we will explore this even further in the next session, we assure you. That which you perceive as the mantra of that which we are presently is very much reflective of that symbology. And if you look throughout history, you will find this symbol in virtually every aspect of your society, back to virtually to the end of the first cycle, or the beginning, depending on the perspective. And if you choose, you can go back into the last 4 cycles and you will find this particular symbology. It is designed to bring about a shift in consciousness. It is why we have presented it again and again to society, to humankind, in fact, to third-dimensional reality. When you travel through other planets, through other civilizations, through other dimensions of reality, you will find this symbology existing. Now, the key here in this symbology is to recognize that the symbol itself was not the sun, but simply a representation of a movement of energy, very similar to what you perceive today as the symbology of that which we are, the mantra of that which we are. And we will discuss, as we said, this at further length later. But this symbol, fashioned out of gold, perceived in sunlight, was perceived as a oneness and perceived as the sun. And so then it came about. Where does the snake fit into all of this? Now, the interesting thing is, in your Christian society, a snake is viewed as that which would move you away from the essence of beingness. In other words, it's viewed from one perspective as the devil. But we assure you the snake is not. The snake has been vilified falsely. In that particular society that we spoke of in Egyptian times, the snake was also presented as a symbology. Not as a symbology of harm, not as a symbology of evil versus the good of Ra, but simply as an extension of the energy patterns, the movements. We provided society with a perspective that the snake itself, if viewed from a certain perspective, would bring about that which was necessary to shift the consciousness in conjunction with the symbology into a perspective of self-preservation, self-observation, self-discovery. The snake was the symbol of the inwardness of the self. Oftentimes individuals viewed the snake in those days as sacred, for there weren't many, and those that were viewed sacredly. So the symbology given was that the snake was a representation of the inwardness of the self. And we assure you, if you look at yourselves, you'll recognize what we're speaking of. For the snake twists, turns, and slithers around from one perspective to another, which is in effect what the inwardness exploration of self does. Viewed from that perspective, then, the snake provided individuals in society at that point with a direction, a movement that allowed them to choose, if they chose, a certain willingness to explore themselves. That's all it was. It was, however, made into, some would describe as cultish fashion. It was brought about where snake societies were created, reptilian societies were created, where individuals worshipped the snake to such a degree as to pretend to be some themselves. But it was perceived that the snake could harm, and because of that it was used to harm. However, the snake is a rather accurate representation of the inward journey. For the inward journey is one of healing, and oftentimes, the double-sided of it, harm. It is choice that creates the harm or the healing. And it's choice applied to the snake that would move the individual to harm the self or others, or to heal the self or others. So in effect, dear friends, the snake was an appropriate representation to humankind. Now, combined with the sun perspective, symbology that we gave, both became a rather powerful tool that, if applied to the extent that we had given, would have shifted the human consciousness to such a degree as to allow humanity to move to a perspective of oneness. That particular civilization and society at that moment in time and space had influence from Atlantean times, had influence from the Pleiadians themselves, extraterrestrials, the other dimensions of reality existences. And so there was a great deal of shift in consciousness, a proper opportunity for shift in consciousness to take place. Not all were chosen. Most were not. For it was viewed by certain individuals as simply an opportunity to become greater than, not viewed as an opportunity for equality. Society, civilization at that point, was harming itself. It was moving to create slavery, and it was harming itself as such. It was being polarized. There was greater than and lesser than perspectives to a greater and greater extent. And civilization necessitated, by its actions,